Let's get started. Thank you for participating in our webinar today. Again, I like to make the disclaimers that the association makes. So if it's good for them, I guess it's going to be good for me. And it's basically letting you know that this webinar is really meant to provide education and information on some of the legal topics that are facing our industry today. But at no time are these webinars any type of substitute for legal advice. Um, Today, we're going to be discussing some of the legal disclaimers, and I've already mentioned to you those. The information that I'm going to give you is basic information that is affecting the industry today, and um, my take, my take on the different this new regulation that only affects those members of the MLS. Remember, people tend to think that because you have a real estate license, you're a realtor, and that's just not so. You could have a real estate license and not be a realtor because you don't pay your $960 fee to participate in the association. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. Okay, I will go over an agreement that I'm using. It's not the agreement that the association recommends. The reason being that the agreement that they recommend, I believe, is 3 pages long, and mine is 1 page, and basically incorporates every requirement of the agreement between the, the lawsuit and NAR. Okay, we're not going to be talking about percentages of commissions, basically because that would constitute a violation of antitrust laws. But I will talk about acceptable commissions that are not acceptable. That's that we can talk about. And I tell you, folks, you're going to get paid what you think you're worth. You know, like a broker was telling me the other night that this broker is a big time broker. He's been the director of the association for many years, and he was telling me, well, you know, real estate agents have to learn to make less money. That's not the point. The point is that you're going to make as much money as you think you're worth. So, again, nevertheless, whatever you think you're worth, you have to conduct your business in a professional, ethical, and lawful manner at all times. Okay, so it's important. It's important to understand that these new regulations are not laws. Perhaps you might see it in my presentation referring to them as laws, but they're not. Okay, they're not. They're basically regulations. Okay, and it only affects those of us who are members of the MLS. If you're dealing with a for sale by owner, this plays no part. So let's talk about some of the drawbacks of this new regulation regarding who pays the commission. Now we got to verify with the listing agent who's paying the commission and how much, and if it's acceptable to me. As this broker was telling me the other night, he says, "Oh, I'm training my salespeople to let them know, that that when they submit an offer, just send the offer asking for more commission, or if the commission, without even talking to the listing agent, And I said, what do you mean without talking to the listing agent? No, just send it in. So what have we become? Messengers? We make our money because we are negotiators, because we know how to negotiate, because we know what the value of a property is. Not just sending messages. How much do you want to offer? How much do you want to accept for your property? How much will you be asking? So, no, because sometimes you call the listing agent and they don't answer the phone. That is true. But do I want to deal with somebody that don't answer the phone, don't answer text messages, don't answer email? Is that the person that I'm going to trust my business to? No. That is why I will never show a property unless I have spoken with that listing agent. And what I'm going to be talking about, not only the commission that the seller is willing to offer me, but I'm going to ask them how best to make this deal work for the seller and for the buyer. And let me tell you this, everybody, just because the commission that is being offered to me is not acceptable to me, that is not the time to be renegotiating my commission. There are other ways of handling it. As the broker was saying, I will send an offer right off the bat stating what I should get paid, and if the seller is not willing to pay me so much, there's no deal. What? That's imposing my interest before the interest of the buyer, before the interest of the seller. I don't recommend we do that. How could we imposing ourselves? So again, understanding that not all listing agents want to share or pay a commission with the selling agent. If they don't want to, okay, let's move on to the next. Or let me work it out where I can get paid whatever I'm worth. Again, not all sellers want to give a seller's contribution to the buyer at closing. That's nothing new. That's nothing new. That's happened all the time. That's happens all the time. And again, not all buyers are willing to sign the exclusive buyer broker agreement. And by regulation, if we don't have that agreement signed by the buyer, we can't show property. So how do we get this done? Just by asking, pay me my commission? Gotta take more than that. You see the word law? It's not a law. How does the new regulation benefit us? Because at the end of the day, this agreement, in my opinion, only benefits us, the realtors, if we know how to sell it. If we know how to sell it. In my opinion, it definitely doesn't benefit the buyer, definitely doesn't benefit the seller. It benefits us. Number one benefit is because now,
yeah, certified, yeah,
now they're working,
yeah.
now they're working with us with an exclusive right of sale. Now they're working with us with an exclusive right of sale agreement. That never happened before. We only had listing agreements. Now we have buyer broker agreement. Now the buyers are going to go off getting all our information, getting all our education, getting all of our directions, and going to go ahead and buying the property through the listing agent or through her cousin, mother, father, brother, best friend, lover. And if they do, they do also commission. Have to understand, we have to understand that we can definitely make commissions from more than one side. We can get it from the buyer side, we can get it from the seller side. We can even get it from a developer, which you gotta keep that in mind. Developers pay commission. And we don't want a buyer going directly to a developer, and excluding us from our commission. This is permitted by Article 7 of the Code of Ethics. Now, there's been teachings through the association saying we're not permitted. We can only get commission from one party. That is not true. That is just not true. We cannot accept compensation from more than one party, even is permitted by law, without disclosure. Meaning that if we disclose, we can. And where do we disclose? Before the closing or at the closing? In my opinion, in my opinion, you know, in my opinion, closing. Come on, I got somebody. You know, in my opinion, and sorry about that. In my opinion, disclosing the commission that I'm earning prior to closing is a violation of antitrust laws. So we just don't. Okay? We just don't. Now, when do we disclose it? Through the CD, through the HUD. That's when we disclose it, but not before. Okay, but not before. So what are we going to do for the buyer to sign the agreement? Because keep in mind, if there's no agreement signed, we can't show property that is listed through the MLS. And how do we have a buyer say, hey, I want to pay you $20,000 worth of commission? Are we going to ask them to take out a second mortgage on their property to pay us? Because that's what some of the workshops are advocating. Or had the or as the broker was saying me, well, we're just going to send them a contract subject to pay me a commission. It's legal. But if the seller agreed to pay X with the listing agent, and now I want X plus, I would imagine that seller is going to be upset. That seller is going to be extremely upset. And I don't want to make him upset because I want him to do the deal with me. So one of the things that we need to really understand right off the bat, that buyer has to be pre-qualified. And that seller has to be pre-qualified. And what is the basis of pre-qualification? Hey, it's not only that they can afford the property, but are they being realistic? Are they being flexible? Are they being receptive? Are they being reasonable? Are they being cooperative? That's my basic pre-qualification of a buyer and or a seller and of a realtor that I'm dealing with. Because again, if I cannot get a hold of the realtor, do I really want to work with that realtor? I don't think so. I'm just not going to send a contract to a realtor without even talking to them. That's like a messenger. And are we messengers? Or are we negotiators, which is where we really earn our commission? Now, some of the buyers may be willing to pay our commission. Some of the buyers will be willing to pay part of our commission. Hey, after all, have they not been paying cash above appraisal? Have they not been paying more than what the property is worth? And making up the difference in cash? But are they all gonna be able to pay our commission? Not all of them. So, one of the conversations that I need to have prior to showing the agreement, prior to having them sign the agreement, I have to ask the buyer if they're aware of the new changes regarding the regulations of who to pay the commission. What answer would I get? Basically, I only see three answers. That they know the changes, they don't know the changes, or they've heard something about it. That's it. And again, you see law, it's not a law, it's a regulation. So no matter what answer the buyer's gonna give me, I'm gonna tell them the basic same answer. I say, listen, you know, nowadays, instead of the listing agents letting me know who's paying a commission, or what kind of commission they're sharing with me, I have to call them and find out. Now, one thing that I'm gonna say to you, you don't have to say this verbatim. You don't have to sound like me. You have to sound like you, but the content needs to be there. So say whatever way you want to say it, but at the end of the day, hey, you know what? I need to call this guy up and find out how much he's gonna pay me. That's what I gotta do. Were you aware of that? So now, once I call the listing agent and they tell me how much they're gonna share commission with me, then I have to find out if it's acceptable, or if it's not acceptable, or if they're not offering anything. I need to have this conversation with the buyer prior to showing the exclusive buyer broker agreement for them to sign. I need to do that. If I don't do it like this, they're just not gonna sign it. Most likely, they're not gonna sign it. So I need to have this conversation with them. If I reach out to the listing agent and the commission being offered is acceptable, that's it. Hey, listen, it's acceptable, you know, I'm sure I'm gonna get it in writing, and I'll show you a document to get it in writing, or in the case that you don't get it back signed by them, send them an email saying, hey, we talked about commission on this particular property, and you offer this percentage. Just in case you need to take them to arbitration at the board, at least you have an email that you send. And also, if you know, I wouldn't use just a text message or a verbal, but, you know, I would put it in writing in the absence of the agreement being signed. But again, if it's acceptable, fine. Remember, the commission that you're going to charge equals what you're worth. That's it. If you feel that you're worth X, go for it. If you figure that, and if you feel that you're worth X plus, then that's what you're worth. That's what you should get paid. It is not like the broker who said to me the other night, realtor have to learn to make less money. No, I'm not in agreement. Realtors need to learn how much they're worth and go from there. So now I'm going to say to the buyer, listen, when I talk to this listing agent and the commission that they're offering me is not acceptable, because actually they're paying me a lot less than what I'm worth, would you be willing to pay my commission? What do you think the buyer's gonna tell you? Oh, yeah, sure, no problem. No, most likely, most likely, most likely, they're not gonna say, you sure, I'll pay your commission. So what would they say? I'm willing or I'm not willing. That's all they can tell you. Or perhaps, but maybe I can pay you some. I don't think a buyer's gonna get into that. They're either gonna tell you, sure, I'll pay your commission, which I don't think is gonna happen, or I'm not willing to pay your commission. Okay, no, I understand that you're not willing to pay my commission. However, if I can have the buyer pay my commission at closing, would that work for you? You see, I'm going over the most important aspect of this buyer broker agreement, which is the compensation component, which is what they care to know. There are other things, but what they care to know is what is it that I'm going to be paying, if I'm going to be paying. So now here I'm going to use a sales technique, which is agree, repeat, and ask the next question. Hey, listen, I understand that you're not willing to pay my commission. So let me ask you, Rachel, if I can have the seller pay my commission at closing, would that work for you? You see, I'm bringing out the objection. I am confronting the objection. If I can have the seller pay my commission at closing, would that work for you? Now, so far, I haven't discussed with a listing agent if they're going to pay me more than what I'm worth or what I expect to be paid. I don't care to talk about that at all. All right. So keep in mind, before you show any MLS properties, you gotta have this agreement in place. So what could the buyer say? Hey, but how is the seller going to pay your commission? Now, listen, if I'm closing, I give you a credit for the amount of commission that you're paying me, would that work for you? Now, gives you a credit for the amount of commission. And by the way, I'm not using the word compensation. Compensation is like a gift. I was wronged, so I'm going to get compensated for something that I didn't do. No, no, no. Commission is I earned it. Anyhow, that's very personal. So, gives you a credit for the amount of commission that you're paying me. Would that work for you? Now, why do I use the word like this? Because it's palatable. It's palatable to the buyer. Well, if the seller gives you the credit, yeah. But now I haven't gone into how that credit's going to look. Okay. I haven't so far. So seller's going to give you, yeah, the seller gives you a credit for my commission, that's okay. I don't care. Yeah, if the seller gives you a credit for your commission, that will work for me. Now, are they going to really tell you, no, I don't want a seller to pay your commission, neither do I? Most likely they're not going to say that. They might ask you, how does that work? Yeah, it worked for me, but how are you going to pull it off? Okay, so now we're going to go, and I'm going to show you the exclusive buyer broker agreement, okay, which is one that I developed for myself. Okay, I developed it for myself. Okay, let me see what it is. Okay, here we go again. Here we go. Share. Okay, here we go. All right. Now, this is the exclusive buyer agreement that I use. Okay. Keep in mind, the most important the most important component of this agreement is the compensation piece. They could care less in general terms about the rest of it. So I need to show, let me show you how it looks in the buyer broker agreement. That would be my first topic of conversation when I'm gonna go over the buyer broker agreement. I'm not gonna go over the parties, the terms, the property, broker obligations, none of that. Compensation, which is what they have in their mind. Then I could go through the rest. So the buyer is responsible to pay me my real estate commission in the amount of whatever you're worth. Yeah, but Raul, you told me that the seller was gonna pay for it. Oh, that is true. I did say that. But let's continue. All right. The payment of this commission is gonna be contingent on you receiving a seller contribution for closing costs in the amount of at least, and it doesn't even have to be for closing costs. It could just be a regular contribution. And that at least is the amount of my commission. Now, why don't I want to use closing costs as commission? Because I don't want to be seen as I'm taking somebody's money that was supposed to be for closing costs. Now it's going to be for commission or compensation. So I don't word it that way. Hey, it's a seller contribution in the same amount that you got to pay me, but you're paying me. When it goes into the HUD, it's showing that the buyer is paying, meaning that they can write it off in their income tax because they did have an expense. Not that the seller paid it. Now, it's important to realize, well, why would the seller pay it? Well, keep in mind that sellers work with equity and buyers work with cash. That's the whole basis of my mindset. For example, I'm talking to a seller. Mr. Seller, my job is composed of 3 different parts. Number 1 is to find you a buyer that is willing to pay what your property is worth. Not what you're asking, because the seller could be asking a lot more than what it's worth. Don't they all? So I want to ask them, hey, look, my job, my number 1 job is getting that buyer to pay, what your property is worth. That buyer to be qualified and ready to go. And my second responsibility is get another broker who may have that buyer that is willing to pay what your property is worth. And my third responsibility is to make sure that it closes. So at closing time, you go home with the money in your pocket. That's what you hire me for. So now let me ask you, if I'm going to if we're going to reach out for that other broker that has a buyer that is willing to pay what your property is worth, and we don't pay them what they are worth or what they believe they're worth, would you think they'll do business with us? We have to learn to ask questions. I hear a lot of agents, they're telling, let me tell you. It's not about letting me tell you. It's about asking the right questions. So we have to learn to ask questions. So if the seller doesn't want to give you any contribution, then you have an option. Now you have an option. So, and this, I run it by several attorneys and they like this clause because in the event that the seller is not willing to make any contribution, it is at the buyer's option to either not purchase the property or pay me the commission. Broker herein may be compensated by the listing agent as well as by the buyer, the seller, or developer, and makes full disclosure at this time. I need to make that disclosure. And again, not only am I making the disclosure, I don't really need to say how much I'm getting paid. Now, in the HUD or in the CD, I do, but because that's what has to be done, but not beforehand. If I start to disclose how much money I make beforehand, that would be a violation of the antitrust laws. So I'm not going to say. But nevertheless, I am discussing with the buyer how this compensation component takes place, which is important because it's the most important thing to that. So I'm also going to ask you, is this agreeable? Now, understand that buyers have been willing to pay above appraisal. So it's up their option. Like it was before. The guy wants a lot more over the appraisal and the buyer wasn't willing to pay. Well, if the buyer wasn't willing to pay, then you move on to the next property. The same thing here. You know, you have the option. The option could be, for example, the compensation, which is not agreeable to me, could be X. But X plus 1 will be agreeable. Buyer, are you willing to pay X? Are you willing to pay 1? Well, no, but I'm willing to pay half of 1. And as a broker, if I'm, I can say, all right, okay, I'm willing to accept half of 1. And half of 1 could not be really a lot of money in the big scheme of things. But it surely will make a difference in what I get paid. Okay? Again, I'm not mentioning percentages because of antitrust laws. I can only give you an example of how to handle it. But at the end of the day, this conversation must be had with that buyer. You've got to have it with the buyer. Now, okay. Loretta, am I talking a little higher or can you raise your volume? Perhaps that might work out, okay? Because I'm really talking loud. All right, so now let's go back to the agreement and let's work it out. Let's work it out. So, okay, do we see the presentation? Anybody? We see it. Okay, thank you, Patricia. All right, so okay, I already went over that the exclusive, the agreement in hand, showing it to the buyer. And this is the point now that after I had this conversation about who's going to pay, we're going to talk about the same thing over again when I read paragraph 4. The only difference is that I've already explained paragraph 4 in my conversation with the buyer. Now I'm going to show it to them in writing and go over it again for the second time, which is the compensation agreement. Okay, we talked about that already. So now let's go to the rest of the agreement. Make sure that all the buyers that are going to be part of the transaction are part of your agreement. And Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, hey, I'm going to help you negotiate a good deal for your property. We're negotiators. We're not messengers. Also, we have to start understanding that we are salespeople. And I hope I don't offend anybody here, because salespeople we have a negative connotation. But if we look at ourselves as being salespeople that are held to a very high degree of ethics, then that to me is palatable. I can accept that. I'm not a tire kicking salesperson. I am a salesperson that is transparent, and I'm a salesperson that, as a transaction broker, we're willing to make sure that the agreement, it is the best for the buyer and for the seller. So, Ms. Buyer, I'm gonna help you negotiate. And and it could be an option, it could be anything. But again, it's in the best interest of you, in the best interest of the seller, to make sure that this agreement, make sure that you come out well. The term of the agreement, I have here 90 days. I wouldn't do 90 days, I would do 45 days. The reason being that if I want to spend more than actually a couple of weeks working with a buyer, I wouldn't want to work with a buyer. So I would say 45 days is plenty of time. I'm gonna have a workshop on the 26th on how I do it to get a buyer to buy within a week or two. And that should be plenty of time if you know how to handle it. If you don't know how to handle a buyer, then you'll be one of those agents that say, oh my God, I've been working with him for the past 6 months and I can't find them anything. Or an agent that told me the other day she'd been working with his buyer for 2 years and then she canceled the contract. What? 2 years? No good idea. Type of property, folks, is either commercial or residential. That's it. Not a duplex, a triplex, a house. It's either commercial or residential. It could be land, it could be a house, And if it's commercial, it's gotta be more than 10 acres and more than 4 units. 5 units and up. That covers that. The zip code location, I like to work with zip codes because if I get a buyer that wants to buy in North Miami and Homestead and it's okay to buy in Broward County as well, I have a very undecisive buyer. Very difficult to make a deal with that kind of buyer. So I need to pin them down. Okay? I need to pin them down. Again, 2 or 3 weeks, they're going to be looking at different locations. And zip code is a very easy way of identifying property. That's why I rather use zip code locations. And then the compensation agreement is number 4. We've been over that. Now, the obligations that I have as a broker, and then in a conversational manner, Mr. Buyer, to me, it's very important to use all my skills or my knowledge to make sure that we could have that you could buy your property. Not only that, I'm going to make sure that I will assist you in identifying that property that suits you the best for you and your family. And then once we find that property, hey, I'll make sure that we can negotiate price and terms that are acceptable to you. And not only that, I want to make sure that once we're entering into a contract, all the deadlines are met. So the last thing we want is to put your deposit in jeopardy. Now, if you notice, I talked my own way. I didn't read verbatim, but the content was there. And that's what I like you to do, to make sure that your content is there. Say it in your own words. But you also have certain obligations. If somebody comes to you and or a broker comes to you, or you see another property that is suitable to you, I expect you to let me know. I expect you to let me know. It could be even, for sale by owner, to let me know. Okay, because if something, heaven forbid, happens, I want you to hold me harmless. Okay, from any losses or any damage or expenses that this business deal may incur. But all I'm asking you for you is, if you see a property that suits your interests, suits your needs, let me know. Can I count on that? See, I'm going over the agreement. Now, let me say this, you may terminate this agreement any time. If you're not happy with my service, just let me know. Put it in writing, send me an email, and let me know. Remember, keep in mind, I'm only gonna work with this person for 2 or 3 weeks. That's it. I might work for more time if I present a reasonable offer with high degree of acceptance and it doesn't get accepted, then I'll give them another couple of weeks. But not because they can't make up their mind, or because they're putting up offers that we know that they're not gonna accept. Now, let me say this, Ms. Buyer. You can terminate the agreement. That's not a problem. But if you go ahead and you buy a property that I showed you before, guess what? You owe me a commission. So I'm gonna give you 6 months after we terminate the agreement. But if there's any property that you like, that I showed you, call me back. Because if you don't, you gotta pay me my commission. Now, we are transaction brokers. What does this mean? Hey, I have to deal with you honestly, I have to deal with you fairly, I have to use skill, care, and diligence to make sure that you're satisfied with the transaction. And not only that, if I happen to know of any facts that would affect the value of your property, I will let you know. I will let you know. Not only that, when we write up an offer, I'm gonna make sure that it's presented in a timely manner. And anything that you tell me, there's limited confidentiality that I'll be dealing with you. You see, you gotta talk about these things. Because if you don't talk about these things, is there anything, then I'll ask them, is there anything else that I need to clear up for you? Okay, are we good on this? Talk like people talk. Talk like people talk. Are you good with this? Any other questions you may have on transaction brokerage? What am I supposed to represent? Okay, then you move on. At that point, once you go step by step, you had that previous conversation, which basically talked about the compensation and how you're gonna get it done. Signing for them is a laydown. Any other questions that you may have? No, they just turn over the paper and give them a pen and they'll sign it. Sometimes I don't really say, would you sign the agreement? No, I just turn it and give them a pen. That's my nonverbal for a close. Sign it right now. At that moment, they could say, well, let me think about this. Okay, then do you really have a buyer? No. Because remember, you gotta have this agreement before you show property. You gotta have it. If you don't have it, you can't show MLS property. Let's take a look at some of the agreements that we're gonna be working with. Let me see here. Okay. All right. Okay. Compensation agreement, seller, okay, we see it, seller broker to buyer's broker. Okay. So if you're talking to a listing agent and they offer you X amount of compensation, you can send them this compensation agreement. which is between the broker and the buyer. That's your compensation agreement. In the absence of the listing agent wanting to sign this agreement for whatever reason, send them an email. Ask them. Ask them if this would be okay with them. And if the commission that you talked about is still in effect, and if, you know, if it is, it is. Okay? The other thing is, if the agreement, if the agreement, wait a minute, there is oh, here we go. Okay, this is the modification agreement. Let's say that he offered you X, but then after, you know, the agreement was back and forth. Now it's gonna be modified, gonna be plus X or even minus X. Okay, then this is what you use, this document. And again, you can find them in for simplicity. So always have things in writing, makes it a lot easier. Any question on these two agreements? The agreement of the compensation that you're going to receive, and you can receive, let me tell you, you could receive an agreement, a compensation agreement that may not be acceptable to you, and that's okay, but you gotta make sure that the buyer comes up with a balance either out of their own pocket or because a seller gave them a concession. Okay, you don't have to fight with the guy at that point. Well, you're gonna give me more. None of that. Okay, that's what you give. Okay, good. I gotta go get the rest. Any questions on this way of handling the transaction? Again,
I do have a question. At another seminar that I went to, we were told that when you're filling out the buyer's agreement, compensation agreement, that you should always ask for the most compensation that you want to receive, because if the seller offers a certain commission, but it's not quite what you want, you can get the remainder from the buyer, but you can never get, if the buyer only agreed to a smaller amount than what you're willing to accept, that you can't get more than that because you have that agreement, and that I'm a little confused about.
that is correct. But you can always modify the agreement.
Okay.
Okay, you can always
All right.
modify the agreement.
Thank you.
know? But it's correct. This is why I use the term whatever you think you're worth. And I put it that way because that way it is not a question of, well, if I'm not in agreement or if look, if you don't agree, if it's not what you're worth, okay, if it's not what you're worth, then put up what you're worth. Hey, this is what I'm worth. And if they don't pay me what I'm worth, you have the option of not paying it, moving on, or paying it. Especially, but you see, asking the seller to pay you more than the seller agreed with the listing agent, I think is counterproductive and it's actually offensive. A seller is used to being asked for contribution. That's more acceptable. It's more acceptable term than pay me more. That's why I like to use the word, contribution. And if I do for closing costs, they're more understandable that it's for closing costs. Now, I'm not going to dip into the closing costs to pay my commission. The seller, in my mind, is going to have money left over to pay my commission. or the balance of what I expect. Did that clear you up, Loretta?
I believe so.
You believe that doesn't sound to me like
Well, I still am a little confused because honestly, I think there will be problems where you'll have some buyers who need a certain percent of compensation at closing, seller contributions. And then maybe the seller won't want to pay. And I guess this may be a situation that you would walk away, but if I had a sale that was 850 VA and they needed some compensation to be able to close, even though it was nothing down. Sometimes you do have those situations, even when it's not a first time home buyer or a low priced purchase. So I'm just kind of curious in those situations if the sellers are not willing to pay a commission and the buyers are not able to, and the sellers don't want to pay seller contributions to cover a commission, then I guess that's something that you're saying you should just walk away from.
no. Well, sometimes you have to walk away from it. But okay, you mentioned VA. VA is a special type of animal, okay?
Mhm.
Because the VA doesn't allow for a VA purchaser to pay any type of compensation.
They do now, though. They do now.
I haven't heard it. Because the whole idea of a VA is is not to come in with a down payment.
Right.
And $15,000-$20,000, like in your case, the minimum amount commission will be anywhere from $16,000 to $24,000. So now that's like, to me, that's like a down payment. So now they're gonna allow them to pay that amount? I don't.
Well, I think from seller contributions.
Yeah, from no. Seller contribution,
Previously, they wouldn't. They wouldn't
no,
let
no, they wouldn't.
transaction
I
fees
wouldn't,
or anything else.
I could not ask a VA buyer to pay from their pocket because they gave them contribution. They're still paying a commission. No. I think in that case, working with a VA buyer, I would ask for a modification of the commission payment. I said, listen, whatever you guys are offering me, I got this buyer and I'll submit it with that's basically the exception where I'll submit it with with a modification of compensation agreement saying, hey, seller, you got to pay me this much because I'm not allowed to get it from the buyer because it's a VA buyer. You see, I would handle it that way. I wouldn't just because it's compensation now, excuse me, because it's credit from a seller, I'm gonna get it from the buyer. Still gotta come from the seller. And keep in mind, sellers work with equity, buyers work with cash. That's the basis of my presentation. That's the basis of my mindset as to why I can definitely ask a seller to pay what I'm worth. And this is why if I'm working with a seller, I'm going to tell them, hey, there are three aspects of my job. One is getting you a buyer that is willing to pay what your property is worth. The other one is look for a realtor that has that buyer that is willing to pay what your property is worth. And my third responsibility is making sure that we go to closing and get you the money to go home with. That's what I do. So now let me ask you, would you work for less than what you worth?
Yeah, no, I
You
wouldn't
know,
want
would you
to.
work for less than what you worth? No, I mean, I got a seller telling me that the other day. And I asked him that, would you work for less than what you worth? And they said, no. I said, what would we want to then ask for that broker that has a buyer to buy a property to get paid less. Or to work for less than what they're worth. Does that make any sense? Or what sense does that make to us? I wouldn't say to them, but to us. What makes with that sense to us? You know, both of us. Yeah, that's right. Keep it at that commission.
But there was a change to the VA which took effect on August 10th. It's a temporary policy that does allow buyers to pay commissions now.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. I want to see it. I have, it hasn't come across. You know, that was 3 days ago. I'll look into it. But at the end of the day, if the whole idea of a VA is for them not to come up with a down payment, and now they have to pay a commission.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound, you know, I don't know. Do you have that in writing from the VA?
Well, yes, I've read it several places on VA websites because I just did another VA, which closed right before that took effect. But I did see that they said it would be allowed because of this new ruling.
But this ruling only applies to MLS participants. It doesn't apply to if I go to a for sale by owner, or if I sell real estate with a license, but not be part of the association, which means I'm not part of the MLS. I don't need to abide by this ruling. This is just for realtors. So I just don't quite, I have to read it and understand it a little bit better. Okay? But
Okay.
just keep in mind that seller worked with equity. Seller, what have you done in the past year to the property? No, I haven't done anything. Maybe you sweep it, you know, okay? So let's put it at last year's price. No. Why not? Because it's gained value. But you've never done anything to it. Yeah, but still, we can sell it for more. So you see, they work with equity. But the buyer, throughout that year, had to work very hard to put that money together to pay for the down payment and the costs involved. You know, again, when you talk to a buyer or a seller or a realtor, you have to make sure that they're being realistic, they're being flexible, they're being reasonable, receptive, and cooperative. If they're none of these things, then why do business with them? You know, well, I'm not going to pay you any compensation, or I'm going to pay you something that you're not worth. I'm going to pay you a lot less. No, I'm not going to do it. Okay. Just keep in mind that this is one of the best things that has happened to us, because now we have an exclusive agreement with a buyer that they're going to buy from us. They're going to buy from us. They're not going to go running around with somebody else. You can always ask for a contribution. You can ask for the buyer to pay your commission, or you can find another property. The buyer might pay the difference. Might not be what you're expecting, may not be what you're expecting, but it could definitely be, you know, very close to what you expect to get paid, because those things do happen. And then at that point, it becomes acceptable to you. Okay. This is a saying, you know, the compensation cannot be whatever the amount the seller is offering to the buyer broker. That's a mindset. Whatever. What is that? Well, that's what this is why once the seller makes an agreement with the listing agent as to the amount of compensation to the buyer's broker, for me to be asking for more as a condition to the sale, I think it's going to rub the seller the wrong way. It is. Now, in VA cases, will be a little different. At least I have a reason, a reasonable reason. We can definitely request a seller contribution. And I would definitely say for closing costs, you could construe that a commission nowadays is part of your closing costs. But I wouldn't want to put it that way. This is what the broker, number two is what the broker was requesting. That is the commission. If you want to make the deal, this is the commission that you got to pay me. I don't like that at all. The buyer can definitely pay the difference between what I'm being offered and what I'm worth. Or we can always go look for another property. There's always going to be another property out there that they're willing to pay whatever we're worth. Okay. Again, I will never make it a condition. If you don't pay me, no deal. I will never make that condition. I think that's not ethical, in my opinion. You may, even though you may not receive more compensation, you can always amend the agreement. Like you can always amend the agreement to receive less. So if I can amend the agreement to receive less compensation, why I cannot amend the agreement to receive more? As long as the buyer is aware and the buyer initials the change. If you're in an open house, you don't have to have a buyer broker agreement. If somebody walks up to you, hey, what do you do? For me, I'm looking for a house, and it's a casual conversation, you don't need to have a buyer broker agreement. Okay. All right. Definitely, we said this many times, you can always negotiate your commission within the offer. That's okay. Again, I'm kind of against it with the exception of the VA. Okay. What about if the buyer goes directly to the listing agent? Hey, tell you what, learn how to list. Okay. You got to learn how to list. And not only that, because a buyer goes directly to a listing agent, me as a listing agent doesn't mean that I'm not going to charge him for my services. I'm going to charge him for my services. Why not? At the end of the day, folks, you've got to pre-qualify 100% of the people, 100% of the time. Be it buyers, be it sellers, even being realtors. Just make sure that before you're starting to sell, to show property, that they have this agreement signed with your buyer. So verify that commission, that compensation that is being offered to you. Make sure that you get it in writing through an email or through the compensation agreement that I showed you. I don't recommend text messages or just a verbal agreement. Okay, you want to know what you're going to be paid in writing, and this is unfortunate because now the conversation becomes with the listing agent, how much am I going to make, as opposed to what are we going to do to make this deal happen for the seller and the buyer to come out. So it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. Remember, this only applies to MLS participants, meaning that because we're members of the National Association of Realtors, it doesn't apply to anybody else. Now, you can promote, if you have a listing, how much commission you're paying. Never say how much commission you're charging, or how much commission you're paying. That's okay. Again, if you're not paying what you're worth, you don't have to work with that person. If the buyer's not willing to pay what you're worth, so why are you gonna work with that person? These are NAR rules for us only. Us meaning members of the MLS. And in that agreement, as you noted, you have to disclose how you're gonna get paid. Again, you say that right now they're allowing it. Perhaps I will check into it. To me, it's kind of like, I know that the association asked the VA to allow the veterans to pay for commissions. They allowed it. I mean, they asked for allowance. I don't know if they got it. You're telling me that they did. So I have to check into that. And if they did, that's great, but that kind of defeats the whole purpose of a VA buyer. Okay, definitely Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, they allow for selling concessions. They allow for buyers to pay commissions. That's not a problem. I don't see agencies allowing a buyer to finance compensation into the mortgage or getting a second mortgage. This is the new thing now. Oh, we'll give them a second mortgage. You really think a buyer is gonna pay additional monies every month on a second mortgage to pay for a commission? That may be in place, but I wouldn't see many people signing a second mortgage to pay a commission. I just don't see it. Perhaps you do. Well, or how about if they don't qualify because of that second mortgage? So I just don't see it. Again, I just hope that I was able to, to help you in understanding a little better what we need to be doing and how to get paid. And that's part of my mission. We will be having every other week for those of you who are new, webinars, and the webinar coming up on the 26th of September is going to be buyer efficiency. How to get a buyer to buy in 2 or 3 showings. That to me is extremely important. I'm just not going to be showing endless amount of time. Okay. As you all know, my name is Raul Orta. I'm a real estate coach. These webinars are sponsored by Security Title. And if you find value in what I'm talking and what I'm teaching, hey, let other people know, let other agents know. They can sign up through Angela at securitytitlesfl.com. We'll be doing good webinars coming up now in the end of September, October, November. We're going to wrap up the year strong. Wrapping up the year strong is extremely important for our next year's production. A lot of the agents stop working in October, because already the holidays, mid-October, and then we got the Veterans Day, and then we go for Christmas, and nobody buys, and that's not true. So we got to get ready for next year already. I'm getting ready for next year. I'm setting up all my marketing for next year, everything, it's like 4 months in advance. Okay, so if you find value in what I'm teaching, reach out to Angela at securitytitlesfl.com and sign up. And if you have a deal that you're working on and you need my 2 cents worth and knowing, hey, how can I put it together, or read over my contract? Hey, I'm willing to do so. I was reading a contract the other day on an agent, and it said in the additional clauses, it said seller to pay before closing all governmental assessments. And the listing agent was willing to take it. And I said, wait a minute, where is this property located? And I looked it up, and it has a CDD. And I mentioned that to the listing agent. He said, well, they paid it already. It's only $1,500. Yeah, $1,500 a year for the next 30 years. So it's not $1,500. It's more like $40,000. So take that clause out of there. You don't want to have that seller having that kind of liability. So she took it out and we closed and saved them a lot of money. So I do look at contracts, I look at the print and what you're writing in there to make sure that everybody comes out, no surprises at the end. And again, if you want to place an order, we can open up for an order for you. Try it, security title. We do have transaction coordination, which is an expense that you don't have to pay anymore, or the sellers pay. And one thing that differs us from many other title companies is that we guarantee the fund. Meaning that, especially with all the wire frauds taking place, if that happens, that money will be there at closing because it's guaranteed. Everybody's going to tell you they're insured. Fine. When I'm inquiring about insurance, if we're found like we're insurable for that theft, it takes about 30 to 40 days to get the money. In the meantime, what happens with the closing? So, guaranteed. Day of the closing, the money will be there, regardless whether they take it, they got it back or not. Anyhow, send me an order and we'll work on it, and hopefully we can continue being of service to you. Again, thank you for participating in this webinar. And if you have any questions, my phone number is 305-772-4932. Give me a call and I'll be more than happy to talk to you a little more about what's going on. Okay? Or learn from you.